Chapter 3. Albert's holographic projection appeared in Dr. Erwin's lab, astonishingly lifelike. "Good morning, Dr. Erwin," Albert greeted with a familiar warmth. "Professor, thank you for accepting my call. How's the weather in Berlin?" Dr. Erwin asked. "Freezing, as usual. How's it in Perth, down under?" Albert chuckled. "Perth is always summer compared to most of the world," Dr. Erwin replied, gesturing toward the bright sky. "I trust you've read my proposal." Albert's hologram flickered as his expression grew serious. "I have. Your theory on reversing the Higgs transformation is intriguing but puzzling. Particles interact with the Higgs field to acquire mass, not the other way around. What you're suggesting sounds impossible." "Not impossible. Just improbable," Dr. Erwin corrected, steady and calm. He launched into his theory, how particles from cells to entire biological systems could revert to a massless state, if freed from interaction with the Higgs field. In the early universe, he explained, particles existed without mass in a symmetric Higgs field. During the electroweak phase transition, the Higgs field became non-zero, giving particles mass. He paused. "My theory proposes reversing this process. By preventing particles from interacting with the Higgs field, they could lose mass, transforming consciousness into positive geometry." Albert leaned in, thoughtful. "But how do you use the Higgs field to transport the mind to the past?" Dr. Erwin smiled. "We capture the brain's activity through a neural interface, converting it into a quantum substrate. Then, we translate it into scattering amplitudes within the Higgs field. Align those quantum states with temporal coordinates, and we can project consciousness to any point in time." Albert's image flickered before stabilizing again. He nodded. "Impressive. Do you still keep in touch with Carl Hakim?" Dr. Erwin asked. Albert grinned, lighting his pipe. "Ah, Carl. We had a poker game last week, and I told him about your proposal. He was intrigued. Excited, even. He thinks your work is groundbreaking and could open new avenues." Dr. Erwin leaned in. "So, has he agreed to fund it?" Albert smiled, his eyes distant for a moment. "Carl has agreed on one condition. He and I will serve as the board of directors. Once that's settled, you can start hiring your team." Erwin reflected on how he had secured funding for his vision, thanks to his former professor, Albert Weber, and venture capitalist Carl Hakim. At the time, when Albert had revealed that Carl had already agreed to fund the project. But looking back, it all felt too perfectly aligned. The timing, the connections, it seemed uncanny. Erwin couldn't shake the unsettling thought that his own relentless drive might have somehow set these events in motion, manipulating the threads of fate to his advantage. It wasn't the first time he'd questioned whether his desire to make mind travel a reality had created the serendipitous moments that led him to this point. He pushed the thought aside for now, focusing instead on what had come next. Another memory came into sharp focus. Perth, 2048, just a few months after securing funding for the Mind Travel Lab. The scene played vividly in his mind, as though he were reliving it. Sitting in his Perth office, Dr. Erwin sifted through resumes of candidates applying for the role of project manager. One name stood out, Maya Joy. Her career history painted an impressive picture of someone adept at managing complex scientific projects. She had a proven track record of orchestrating teams to deliver intricate work on time, qualities that aligned with Dr. Erwin's vision. Intrigued, he invited her for an interview. On the day of the interview, Dr. Erwin sat across from Maya in the sleek, modern conference room of the Mind Travel Lab. Sunlight poured through the large windows, illuminating the space with a soft, warm glow. Maya entered, wearing a subtle yet formal pink shirt and gray skirt. Her light makeup complemented her olive skin, and her shoulder-length hair added to her professional yet approachable appearance. As the interview began, Dr. Erwin asked about Maya's experience managing complex projects and the challenges she had faced. Her responses were sharp and concise, reflecting her deep knowledge and problem-solving abilities. Dr. Erwin noted the calm confidence she exuded, exactly the kind of expertise his lab needed. "Maya, your background is impressive," Dr. Erwin said. "But why this role? Why here?" Maya paused, choosing her words with care. "I've seen the skepticism, read your responses. I have questions of my own. But the opportunity to work on something groundbreaking is what draws me in," she replied plainly. Dr. Erwin nodded, appreciating her honesty, but he wanted to probe further. "Can you elaborate?" he asked, leaning back, fingers interlaced over his chest. Maya remained quiet for a moment, considering her words as she met Dr. Erwin's steady gaze. Finally, she spoke. "I can manage this project," she said. "But I'll admit, despite your convincing answers," she hesitated, then continued, "the leap from scientific theory to a functional mind travel device seems like a bridge too far." Her candidness, along with a subtle reference to a classic movie Dr. Erwin liked, caught him off guard. Feeling the need to clarify, he began, "Most scientists work with abstract concepts. Few ever see their theories proven in their lifetime. Take Einstein's relativity. It was years before technology could confirm his calculations." Maya nodded but remained quiet, allowing Dr. Erwin to explain further. "We're in an era where mind travel is more than fiction," he continued. "Venture capitalists are willing to invest in the possibility. And if it doesn't work out, they just write it off," Maya said, her tone casual. "You know why?" Dr. Erwin asked, mirroring her tone. "Because we've pushed conventional tech to its limits," Maya replied. "Exactly. The real breakthroughs are in fringe science." Maya leaned back thoughtfully. "So, you believe your idea offers the next big breakthrough?" Dr. Erwin nodded. "We're on the verge of something extraordinary. I need the best team to make it happen." He leaned forward slightly. "What do you think?" Maya smiled, her confident and honest response striking a chord with Dr. Erwin. "If you believe in it, I can work with that." Pleased with her answers, Dr. Erwin decided to lay out his own condition. "I think we can do great things together, but before we move forward, I have one condition." He paused for emphasis. "I'll be the only test subject for the mind travel prototype. I'll set up the upload hardware remotely in my private lab in South Perth, while your team constructs the quantum core here." His thoughts briefly wandered to his secluded lab by the Swan River, a place that offered the quiet he needed for such a monumental task. "How do you plan to integrate and test the hardware?" Maya asked, withholding any direct criticism of Dr. Erwin's decision to work remotely. She had already committed to the daunting mind travel concept, only to find out Dr. Erwin's plan would further complicate things. "I understand your concerns," Dr. Erwin said earnestly. "But given the uncharted territory we're entering, I can't risk anyone else's mind until I'm sure it's safe." Maya thought for a moment. The opportunity to be part of something revolutionary was undeniable, but Dr. Erwin's conditions presented significant hurdles. "I accept your offer," Maya said after a pause, "but I have a condition too. Given the complexity of this project, we'll need the best minds on board." She then brought up Jeff Majestic, a colleague she had worked with at CERN. His experience in managing remote software deployment and complex systems made him the perfect fit for the role. "I know someone ideal for this, Jeff Majestic. We work together at CERN, and his expertise is unmatched." Dr. Erwin nodded, considering Jeff's qualifications. It seemed like fate had placed Maya in his life at just the right time, and now her connection to Jeff only reinforced that belief. The threads of cause and effect were weaving together into something undeniable. Erwin reflected on his interview with Maya. Although he still believed she was the best candidate for the position, the way she had subtly shifted the dynamics during the conversation lingered in his mind. It wasn't her skills or qualifications that troubled him. It was the way she had turned the tables, making him work harder to convince her rather than the other way around. The interaction had left him unsettled, raising questions about whether he had been manipulated or if his own eagerness had clouded his judgment. Letting go of the immediate memory, Erwin relaxed his focus, zooming out from that specific moment and extending his awareness across a broader timeline. Years of mind travel had granted him the ability to view time not as a linear progression, but as a vast interconnected web of events. In this meditative state, he could hover above entire months or years, each significant moment glowing like a node ready for him to examine. His perception stretched out across time, allowing him to observe both events he had directly experienced and those where he hadn't been physically present, but still felt a deep subconscious connection. The more journeys Erwin undertook, the more expansive his awareness became. Time itself had transformed for him. It was no longer a rigid sequence, but a fluid, malleable substance he could explore. As he zoomed out further, these moments appeared like constellations, each influencing the others in ways he hadn't fully appreciated before. This shift in understanding had changed not only how he viewed time, but how he navigated it. Erwin's focus sharpened on a moment from 2048, shortly after his interview with Maya. He saw himself preparing for his first formal meeting with Jeff in the newly established mind travel lab in Perth. The memory materialized before him, vivid and immersive, drawing him back into the conference room where sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden table. Jeff entered the room, his casual appearance, jeans and a plain white shirt, at odds with the weight of the meeting. His confident, relaxed stride suggested years of experience in handling high-stakes projects. Dr. Erwin rose to greet him, extending his hand. "Welcome, Jeff. Please take a seat," Dr. Erwin said, his gaze steady as Jeff nodded and settled into the chair opposite him. "Thanks for having me, Dr. Erwin," Jeff replied, his voice measured but betraying a hint of curiosity. A few moments of silence passed, feeling longer than they were. Dr. Erwin had planned a traditional interview approach, but, now face-to-face with Jeff, decided against it. Instead, he recalled Maya's firm recommendation to hire Jeff, not as a demand, but because she sensed something deeper in his abilities. Dr. Erwin began with light questions to ease the tension, noting how Jeff's confident posture masked a slight hesitation. Jeff's answers were brief and casual, almost as though he were gauging the direction of the conversation before fully committing. When Jeff seemed more at ease, Dr. Erwin decided to shift gears. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Can you pull off another miracle?" His tone was casual, but the intensity of his gaze revealed the seriousness of the question. The words lingered in the air as Dr. Erwin watched for Jeff's reaction. Across the table, Jeff paused, caught off guard but quickly regaining his composure. He realized Dr. Erwin was referring to his work at CERN, specifically, his role in capturing the transition state of the Higgs field. "I wouldn't call it a miracle," Jeff said with a calm smile. "But as for pulling off another one, I'll give it my best shot." Dr. Erwin smiled, satisfied with the confidence Jeff exuded. Now came the harder question. Can you build a quantum mind capable of transforming particles back into the Higgs field? Dr. Erwin's eyes didn't waver, watching for Jeff's reaction. Jeff hesitated, processing the complexity of the task. "I understand the basics," he replied, his expression thoughtful. "You're asking to reverse engineer the Higgs boson." Jeff paused, contemplating the challenge. Sensing that Dr. Erwin was testing him further, he chose to shift the conversation, steering it toward the practical challenges. "I've managed complex projects before, but yours has definitely stirred up some buzz. Carl Hakim's involvement has gotten people talking, though opinions are mixed." Dr. Erwin, detecting Jeff's unspoken skepticism, considered explaining the deeper intricacies of the theory, but decided the interview had run its course. "So, can you pull off another miracle?" he asked again, this time with a slight grin. Jeff didn't hesitate. Leaning forward, he met Dr. Erwin's gaze directly. "I can't promise miracles, but I'll give you everything I've got," he said, his hands resting firmly on the table. Dr. Erwin stood, extending his hand once more. Jeff rose to shake it, The unspoken understanding between them solidified. The deal was set. And there it was again. Erwin couldn't shake the feeling that both Jeff and Maya had turned the tables on him during their interviews. They had each made him sell the job to them, flipping the power dynamic in a way that left him questioning whether he had been outmaneuvered. Was he being manipulated by their doubt and subtle leverage, or had his quest to build the mind travel device clouded his judgment? Erwin zoomed out, not just from his interview with Jeff, but from the entire sequence of events that had unfolded in the past months. From his perspective, time was laid out like a vast tapestry, with each thread representing a specific moment, each decision weaving into the next. The sheer strain of mentally leaping between events, analyzing the ripple effects of every choice, was overwhelming. Even with his mastery of time recall, it required intense focus. Erwin knew he had to push through the mental fatigue. This was the only way to truly grasp what had gone wrong. His mastery of these techniques hadn't come easily. He had learned them from the Dreamers, an ancient civilization in the Nexus System, over 86 million years in the past. The Dreamers had perfected skills that humanity had long lost: the ability to perceive time with unparalleled clarity and to recall memories with an immersive precision. Where humans experienced fragmented, unreliable memories, the Dreamers could revisit their past as though it were happening in real time, with every detail intact. During his travels, Erwin had trained under the Dreamers, adapting their methods for his own needs. He had become a conscious observer within his memories, able to watch himself from above while simultaneously living the experiences from within. The duality of this perspective was both disorienting and enlightening, allowing him to extract insights that normal recollection would have missed. Zooming out from the interview with Jeff, Erwin traced the following weeks and months, focusing on a pivotal moment in Perth, 2048, the day he met his newly assembled team. Perth had evolved into a bustling hub for international tech companies, a magnet for innovation. Dr. Erwin's Mind Travel Lab stood as a testament to the city's commitment to pushing the limits of technology and science. The lobby of the lab was sleek and modern, bathed in natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows. A rotating holographic model of an older quantum computer, its intricate disks and gold tubes now relics of the past, hovered in the center, a nod to how far technology had come. Dr. Erwin stood near the entrance, a thoughtful expression on his face as he awaited his team. After months of carefully selecting the best minds, today marked the beginning of their shared journey to create a quantum mind travel device. Maya Joy, his project manager, was the first to arrive, striding into the lobby with purpose. "Dr. Erwin, everyone's here," she said. Maya's choice of a colorful one-piece dress with soft green eyeliner added personality and cultural flair to the typically sterile, tech-heavy environment. "Thank you, Maya," Dr. Erwin replied, smiling. He was impressed by how she presented herself, professional yet distinct. "Let's go meet the team." Jeff Majestic, the lead engineer with over 15 years of experience, was the first team member Dr. Erwin greeted. Jeff had a rugged, no-nonsense demeanor, dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt with a magic hat on it, a nod to his knack for pulling off engineering miracles. "Good to see you, Jeff," Dr. Erwin said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the lab." Jeff shook his hand firmly. "Thanks, Dr. Erwin. This place is something else." With a grin, Dr. Erwin quipped, ready to pull off another miracle, referencing Jeff's reputation for making the impossible possible. Jeff smirked. "Like I said, as long as you're footing the bill, I'll work the magic." They shared a brief laugh, exchanging remarks about the advanced facilities before Jeff stepped aside, making way for the next team member. Moshe Barham, the quantum mind QM data engineer, approached with a slight hesitation. Younger than Jeff but already a rising star, Moshe exuded enthusiasm. "Hi, Dr. Erwin," Moshe greeted with a grin. "Glad to have you, Moshe," Dr. Erwin replied, recalling their initial meeting where Moshe's sharp intellect and overthinking tendencies had made an impression. During the interview, Moshe had outlined the challenges of keeping QM software up to speed with hardware advances, emphasizing the need for tailored algorithms and parallel quantum infrastructures. "I'm excited to get started," Moshe said, keeping his introduction brief before joining Jeff in conversation. Next was Bernard Anderson, the quantum mind architect. Tall and introspective, Bernard's presence was calm but focused. "Welcome, Bernard," Dr. Erwin greeted warmly, recalling Bernard's meticulous vision for the project's architecture, with a focus on scalability, error correction, and redundancy. "Thank you, Dr. Erwin," Bernard replied. They chatted briefly about Bernard's passion for motorbikes, before Bernard joined the others. Ben Slovene, the head of systems engineering, was next, his stride confident but no nonsense. "Hi, Ben," Dr. Erwin said, shaking his hand. "Good to be here," Ben replied in his usual succinct style. Known for his upfront approach, Ben had reassured Dr. Erwin during his interview with his pragmatic solutions for ensuring system stability. "How do you find the facilities?" Dr. Erwin asked. "Impressive," Ben remarked before moving to join the rest of the group. Jacob Rosenberg, the neuroscientist, stepped forward next, wearing a tailored brown suit that looked like it belonged to another era. Dr. Erwin welcomed Jacob, recalling their fascinating discussions about consciousness during the interview. Jacob's bold stance, that consciousness creates matter, had set him apart in a field dominated by materialist perspectives. His unique approach would play a pivotal role in the project. After some small talks, Jacob joined the rest of the team. Nina Sharma, head of testing, arrived in a driverless taxi, wearing a simple yet elegant white shirt and black skirt. Dr. Erwin greeted her, recalling how Nina had impressed him with her methodical approach to testing. Her insistence on thorough validation protocols had assured Dr. Erwin that his project was in capable hands. Finally, Mark Zimmer, the quantum integrated information physicist, arrived wearing his signature gray suit and vintage-style hat. Mark's interview had been one of the most intellectually stimulating, with his insights into positive geometry and its potential to reshape their understanding of space-time. "Welcome, Mark," Dr. Erwin said. "Glad to have you on board."